Paris in January is not the Paris of postcards. The Paris of January is gray in a way that feels personal, as if the city has decided to withhold itself from you specifically. The light, flat and cold, the same the color of old pewter. The streets were from a rain that stopped an hour ago and will start again in an hour. The bare plane trees along the boulevard standing like they are waiting for something that may not come. The cafes are warm inside, steamed up, smelling of coffee and galaxies and the particularly yeasty warmth of bread that has been baking since before dawn. And the people inside them have the look of people who have made a reasonable accommodation with the cold, who have decided that the cold is simply the condition of January and that the correct response is a second coffee and a newspaper and the patience of a civilization that has been doing this for a very long time. The Beatles arrived at Le Bourget Airport on January 14, 1964, and the first thing they noticed was that nobody was screaming. This sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. For the better part of 2 years, the sound of their public life had been the sound of screaming. At airports, at theaters, outside hotels, in the streets, the specific high-pitched sustained roar of thousands of young women who had decided that these 4 young men from Liverpool were the most important thing in the world. They had learned to move through it the way you learn to move through weather, with your head down and your collar up and your body angled toward the nearest door. They had learned to sleep through it, to eat through it, to hold conversations through it. The screaming had become the texture of their existence, the background noise against which everything else happened. At Le Bourget, there were perhaps 200 fans. Enthusiastic, certainly, loud enough, by any ordinary standard. But by the standard that John and Paul and George and Ringo had developed over the previous 2 years, it was quiet. It was almost peaceful. And the quiet had a quality to it that none of them mentioned out loud, but all of them felt. The quality of a question being asked. The question being, who are you here when nobody knows you yet? The Olympia was Bruno Coquatrix's theater on the Boulevard des Capucines, and it was, and remains, one of the great music venues in the world. Edith Piaf had played there. Jacques Brel had played there. The walls had absorbed decades of French chanson, the particular emotional directness of a musical tradition that believed, above all things, in the primacy of the song and the singer and the unmediated connection between them and the audience. It was not a theater that was accustomed to being used as a backdrop for hysteria. It was a theater that expected to be listened to. The French audiences listened. This was, for the Beatles, a genuinely disorienting experience. They were accustomed to performing into a wall of sound so complete that they could not hear themselves play, had not been able to hear themselves play for months. In fact, which was its own quiet crisis that none of them had yet fully articulated. They were accustomed to performance being almost beside the point, a ritual rather than a communication, the audience's response predetermined and total regardless of what actually happened on stage. In Paris, the audiences watched. They applauded at the end of songs. They sat in their seats. A few of them screamed, but not many, and not with a sustained, overwhelming commitment of British or German audiences. It was, in the most literal sense, possible to hear the music. John Lennon found this deeply uncomfortable, and he found it deeply uncomfortable in a way that he could not entirely explain, which made it more uncomfortable still. He was 23 years old, and he had spent the last 2 years learning to perform for an audience that did not require him to actually perform, that would have responded with equal fervor to almost anything he did on stage, that had decided in advance that he was extraordinary and was not going to be argued out of it by evidence. The Paris audiences had not decided this. The Paris audiences were waiting to be convinced. And John Lennon, standing in the wings of the Olympia on the first night, listening to the polite, attentive sound of a French audience settling into their seats, felt something that he would not have been able to name precisely, but that I will name for him, because I have read enough of what he said in the years that followed to know what it was. He felt seen, not in the way that fame makes you feel seen. The vast, indiscriminate visibility of being known by people who do not know you, the strange loneliness of being recognized everywhere and understood nowhere. He felt seen in the older, more frightening sense. The sense of being looked at by people who had not already decided what they were looking at. The sense of being evaluated rather than celebrated. And the question underneath that feeling, the question that the polite Parisian silence was asking in a way that the British screaming never had, was a question that John Lennon had been running from since approximately 1963, and that he would spend the rest of his life alternately confronting and evading. Is it actually good enough? They played well. They played very well. They were, by January 1964, a band of extraordinary tightness and power. for musicians who had spent years in the Hamburg clubs playing 8-hour sets and had come out the other side with a collective musicianship that most bands never achieve. The Paris audiences responded with genuine warmth, genuine appreciation. The shows were not failures. They were not even close to failures. But they were not the palladium. They were not the screaming. And in the absence of the screaming, John Lennon was left alone with the music, which was where he had always been most at home and most afraid simultaneously. The hotel was the George V on the avenue that bears the same name, 8 blocks from the Olympia. It is the kind of hotel that exists to make you feel that the world is arranged for your comfort, the carpets deep, the lighting warm, the staff trained to the specific art of making famous people feel that their fame is the most natural thing in the world and requires no comment. The Beatles occupied a floor of it, which meant that the logistics of their existence, the security, the fans gathered on the pavement below, the journalists who wanted interviews, the record company people who wanted meetings, could be managed with some degree of order. In the evenings after the shows, they gathered in one of the suites. Brian Epstein would be there, and Neil Aspinall, who had been with him since Liverpool and who had the particular quality of a man who has seen everything and is surprised by nothing, and sometimes a journalist or photographer who had been granted access for the evening. There was always a drinks cabinet. There was always a record player. There was, in those Paris evenings, a quality of enforced leisure that none of them were entirely comfortable with. For young men from working-class Liverpool who had been moving at full speed for 2 years suddenly deposited in one of the most expensive hotels in Europe with time on their hands and the grey Paris winter outside the windows. Paul wrote, he had brought a guitar to Paris and he played it in his room in the mornings and the evenings, working through ideas with a methodical, almost compulsive creativity that was his particular engine. It was in the George V, in the second week of January 1964, that he wrote the chord sequence that would become Can't Buy Me Love, sitting on the bed in his room with a guitar across his lap and the grey Paris light coming through the window, working it out in 20 minutes with the ease of a man for whom melody is simply the language he thinks in. He played it for John that evening. John listened and said it was good and meant it, and there was between them in that moment the specific quality of two people who have been making things together long enough to know, without discussion, when something works. George explored the city. This was characteristic. George Harrison in any new place was a man who wanted to understand it from the ground up, who wanted to walk the streets and find the record shops and sit in the cafes and watch the people and absorb the specific texture of a place before he formed an opinion about it. He found a guitar shop near the opera and spent an afternoon there, playing instruments he couldn't afford and talking to the owner in the combination of schoolboy French and mime that served as his primary mode of communication in Paris. He came back to the hotel with a bag of French guitar strings and the satisfied expression of a man who has spent an afternoon doing exactly what he wanted to do. Ringo played cards. Ringo, in any situation that presented itself, played cards. And John moved through the Paris days with the restless, slightly unfocused energy of a man who cannot settle, who picks up books and puts them down, who starts conversations and loses interest in them, who stands at a window of his hotel room looking out at the grey avenue below with the expression of someone who is looking for something and cannot remember what it is. He was not unhappy. I want to be precise about this, because the mythology of John Lennon has a tendency to reach for darkness when complexity would be more accurate. He was not depressed, not in crisis, not falling apart. He was something more ordinary and more interesting than any of those things. He was a 23-year-old man who had achieved more than he had ever specifically planned to achieve and who was discovering, in the quiet of a Paris January, that achievement and satisfaction are not the same thing and do not necessarily arrive together. He had wanted, since he was a teenager in Liverpool, to be in a band, to play music, to matter, in the way that Elvis had mattered to him when he was 16 and the world had seemed to rearrange itself around a voice coming out of radio. He had wanted that, the music, the connection, the sense of something real passing between the stage and the audience. He had not specifically wanted the George V Hotel and the security detail and the fans on the pavement and the inability to walk down a street without being recognized. Those things had arrived with the music, and he had accepted them as a prize to the music, but he had not wanted them for themselves. And now, in Paris, where the screaming was quieter and the audiences listened and the music was audible on stage for the first time in months, he was confronting a question that the noise of British Beatlemania had successfully drowned out for 2 years. The question of what came next. The question of whether the thing they were building was the thing he had set out to build. The question of whether the size of it, The fame, the machinery, the global apparatus of Beatlemania that was already, in January 1964, larger than any of them had planned for, was going to leave room for things that had mattered in the first place. The telegram arrived on the evening of January 17th. Neil Aspinall brought it to the suite where they were gathered after the show, a folded piece of paper, the kind of communication that still carried, in 1964, a weight that a phone call did not, the formality of the written word delivered by hand. He gave it to Brian Epstein, who read it, and whose face did the thing that Brian Epstein's face almost never did in company, which was lose its composure entirely. It was from Capitol Records in New York. I Want to Hold Your Hand had entered the American Billboard chart at number 1. Not climbed to number 1. Entered at number 1. The largest first-week sales of any single in the history of the American market. 73 million people. The whole country. Brian read it aloud. Then he read it again, because the first reading had not produced the response he expected, and he wanted to make sure everyone had understood. Paul understood immediately. He let out a sound that was not quite a word. Something between a laugh and a shout, the involuntary vocalization of a body receiving news that is too large for immediate processing. And then he was on his feet, and then he and Ringo were embracing with a slightly awkward physicality of two young men who are very happy and are not entirely sure what to do with their bodies in that condition. George was smiling, the wide, genuine smile that his lean face produced rarely enough that it always registered, always meant something. Brian was saying things, practical things about what this meant for the American tour that was already being planned, about Ed Sullivan, about the logistics of it. But his voice was unsteady in a way that the logistics did not account for. John was sitting in the armchair by the window. He had the telegram in his hand. He had read it, had taken it from Brian and read it himself, the way he always preferred to receive important information, directly, without intermediary. He was looking at it now with an expression that Paul noticed and that he would describe, decades later, in an interview, as the expression John used when something had happened that he needed to be alone with. He was not unhappy. I want to say this again, because it matters. What was on his face was not unhappiness. It was something more complicated than unhappiness, something that required more precision to describe. It was the expression of a man who has been running very fast toward a destination and has arrived at it, and is standing in it, and is discovering that arrival is a different experience than the running was. That the destination, now that he is in it, raises questions that the running did not. Paul said, "John, did you hear? Number 1, the whole of America." John looked up from the telegram. He said, "I heard." Paul said, "That's it. Then, that's everything." John looked at him for a moment. Then he said, quietly, in the tone he used when he was saying something he meant completely and did not want to perform, "Is it?" Paul didn't have an answer for that. Not because he didn't understand the question. Paul McCartney has always understood John Lennon's questions, even the ones that weren't fully formed, but because the honest answer was that he didn't know either, and the evening was too good to spend on not knowing. The celebration continued. There was champagne. Brian had champagne produced with the efficiency of a man who had been waiting for an occasion that justified it. There was noise and laughter and the particular euphoria of 4 young men who had just been told that the thing they built together is the biggest thing in the world. It was real, the euphoria. It was not performed. They had earned this, all 4 of them, in the Hamburg cellars and the Liverpool clubs, in the years of playing to nobody and the years of playing to everybody, and the joy of the evening was genuine and large and deserved. John stayed in the armchair for a while. He drank his champagne. He laughed at the right moments. He was present, in the way that John Lennon was always present, sharply, electrically, with the full force of his attention available to anyone who engaged it. He was not absent. He was not withdrawn. But at some point in the evening, Paul could not remember exactly when, and neither could George, and Ringo was not the kind of man who tracked these things. John was not in the armchair anymore. He was not in the suite. He had gone, quietly, without announcement, the way he sometimes went when he needed to be somewhere that was not where everyone else was. He was in his room. The room was dark except for the lamp on the nightstand, and the gray Paris night was outside the window, and the avenue below was quiet in the way that Paris is quiet at 2 in the morning. Not empty, never empty, but settled into itself, the city doing what it does when the tourists and the theater crowds have gone home and only the people who actually live there are left. A taxi moved along the avenue. A couple walked on the pavement below, close together against the cold, their breath visible in the lamplight from the hotel entrance. John sat on the edge of the bed with the telegram on the nightstand beside him and looked at the window for a long time. What was he thinking? I cannot tell you with certainty, because he was alone and he did not write it down, and the people who knew him best were in the next suite celebrating. But I can tell you what he said in the years that followed, in the interviews and the songs and the occasional unguarded conversation that found its way into the record. I can tell you that he talked more than once about the fear that arrived with success, not the fear of failure, which he understood and had made his peace with, but the specific, vertiginous fear of success, the fear of the size of the thing, the fear that the machine they had built was now larger than any of them and would continue with or without the music that had started it. He talked about the loneliness of it, not the loneliness of being alone. John Lennon was rarely alone in those years and was not, by temperament, a man who required solitude. The loneliness of being known by everyone and understood by almost nobody. The loneliness of a public self that had become so large and so fixed that the private self had to work harder and harder to find room inside it. He talked about Liverpool, about the specific quality of a life before anyone was watching, the terrace streets of Woolton, his Aunt Mimi's house, the garden where he had first learned to play guitar, the quarrymen playing skiffle in church halls to audiences of 30 people who were there for the sandwiches. He talked about it not with nostalgia exactly. John Lennon was constitutionally allergic to nostalgia, which he regarded as a form of dishonesty, but with a particular tension of a man who is trying to locate something he has misplaced. Something small and essential that was present in the church halls and the Hamburg cellars, and that he was not entirely sure had survived the journey to the George V Hotel and the Capitol Records telegram, and the 73 million Americans. The music. He was trying to locate the music underneath everything that had grown up around it. He picked up the guitar that was leaning against the nightstand. He always had a guitar within reach. This was a constant of his existence, and he played for a while in the dark room, quietly, not writing, not working, just playing. The chords of things he knew, the half-formed shapes of things he was thinking about, the specific private language of a musician thinking out loud when nobody is listening. The sound was small in the large hotel room. The Paris night was outside the window. The telegram was on the nightstand. He played until the celebration in the next suite had quieted and the hotel had settled into its 2 a.m. stillness, and then he put the guitar down and lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. America, the whole of America, waiting on the other side of the Atlantic, 73 million people who had heard the record and decided that it was a thing they needed. He thought about that, about what it meant to make something in a room in Liverpool and have it travel across an ocean and land in the living rooms of people you had never met and would never meet, people whose lives were entirely different from yours, people who were grieving a president and living through winter and sitting in front of their television sets in the gray American January and needing, without knowing they needed it, exactly the thing you had made. That was the thing. That was the thing underneath the telegram and the champagne and the number one and the machinery of it all. That was what had mattered in the church halls and the Hamburg cellars, and what still mattered now in the George V Hotel, in the dark, with a guitar on the bed beside him. The connection, the specific, unrepeatable, almost miraculous fact of making something that reaches across every distance, a geography of class, of language, of grief, and find the person on the other side and says, I know what it feels like. You are not alone in it. He had known this when he was 16, and Elvis came out of the radio and rearranged the world. He had known it in the Hamburg clubs when the music locked in and the room changed and the people in it changed, and something passed between the stage and the audience that was not entertainment and was not performance, but was something older and more necessary than either. He had known it, and he had built his life around it, and he had not lost it. He had just, for a moment, in the noise and the size of everything, forgotten where he had put it. He found it again that night, in a dark hotel room in Paris, with a guitar and a telegram in the gray January city outside the window. Not dramatically, not with revelation or crisis or the kind of moment that makes for a clean narrative. He found it the way you find most important things, quietly, in the middle of the night, when the noise has stopped and you are alone with the thing itself. The vinyl needle finds a groove. The music begins. And somewhere across an ocean, in a living room you will never see, someone hears it and feels less alone. That is what the telegram meant. Not the number one, not the 73 million, not the machinery and the fame and the apparatus of everything that was coming, the Sullivan Show, the airport, the screaming American crowds that would make the British screaming seem, By comparison, like a polite suggestion, it meant that the music had crossed the water, that it had arrived, that it had found the people it was looking for. John Lennon lay in the dark in the George V Hotel and understood this, and the understanding was not triumphant and not peaceful and not any of the things that the story of success is supposed to feel like. It was something quieter and more durable than any of those things. It was enough. The vinyl needle was in the groove, and the music was playing, and somewhere in America, in 1,000 living rooms, in 1,000,000 pairs of ears, in the chest of a nation that had been gray since November and needed, without knowing it needed, exactly this, the music was doing what music does when it is a real thing. It was making people feel less alone. And in the morning, John Lennon got up and went to breakfast and was sharp and funny and present in the way he always was. And the celebration continued, and the plans for America accelerated, and the machine moved forward with the unstoppable momentum of something that has become larger than the people inside it. But he had found it again, in the dark, in the quiet, the thing that had started it all. And the needle plays on,